In the winter of 1942, deep within a government facility outside Stockholm, a baby girl took her first breath in a world of complete silence. No lullabies, no voices, no sounds at all. What Swedish researchers didn't expect was that by depriving her of hearing, they would unlock something else entirely. Something that would make her disappear without a trace 15 years later, leaving behind only questions that still haunt the corridors of power today. The year was 1942, and Sweden found itself in a precarious position. While officially neutral during World War II, the country walked a razor's edge between Nazi Germany and the Allied forces. Behind closed doors, Swedish scientists were conducting research that would make even the most hardened wartime observers uncomfortable. The Department of Human Development, a shadowy branch of the Swedish government, had established what they called controlled environmental studies on human subjects. Dr. Henrik Lindqvist, a prominent child psychologist, believed that human development could be manipulated through sensory deprivation. His theory was simple yet disturbing. Remove one sense completely from birth, and the brain would compensate by developing the others to superhuman levels. The Swedish government, eager to create advantages in an uncertain world, provided funding for what they termed Project Stillness. The subject was baby 47, born to an unwed mother who died during childbirth. With no family to claim her, she became property of the state. From the moment she entered the world, her ears were surgically modified to prevent any sound from reaching her brain. Not deafened, but isolated. The procedure, developed by Dr. Lindqvist himself, involved implanting sound-dampening devices that could theoretically be reversed later. For the first 3 years of her life, baby 47 lived in what researchers called the quiet room, a sterile, white chamber where every surface absorbed sound. Her caretakers communicated only through written notes and gestures, never speaking in her presence. They fed her, clothed her, and monitored her development with the cold precision of scientists studying a laboratory specimen. But something unexpected began happening around her second birthday. The caretakers started reporting strange incidents. Objects in baby 47's room would move without explanation. Toys would slide across the floor toward her outstretched hand. Books would fall from shelves moments before she reached for them. Dr. Lindqvist dismissed these reports as imagination or sloppy record-keeping. The war was making everyone nervous, he reasoned, and his staff was simply seeing things that weren't there. Then came the incident with Nurse Astrid Blomberg. On a cold morning in January 1945, Nurse Blomberg entered the quiet room for the daily examination. She found baby 47, now 3 years old, sitting in the center of the room surrounded by every piece of furniture, all arranged in a perfect circle around her. The heavy wooden desk, the metal filing cabinet, the bed frame, all moved without a sound during the night. When Nurse Blomberg tried to question the child through gestures, baby 47 simply stared at her with those unnaturally bright blue eyes and smiled. Dr. Lindqvist finally took notice when the security cameras began malfunctioning. Every time they focused on baby 47, the lenses would fog over or the equipment would suddenly shut down. He ordered new cameras, better equipment, round-the-clock monitoring. Nothing worked. It was as if the child existed in a bubble that technology couldn't penetrate. By age 5, baby 47 had learned to read and write at an advanced level, communicating with her caretakers through hastily scrawled notes that often contained information she shouldn't have known. She would write about conversations that happened in other rooms, about people she had never met, about events that occurred before she was born. When questioned about these impossible details, she would simply write, "I listen with my hands." If you're finding this story as disturbing as I am, you're not alone. These government experiments push the boundaries of human ethics in ways that still shock researchers today. Make sure you're subscribed because we're diving deeper into cases like this one, and trust me, they only get stranger. The real breakthrough came in 1947 when Dr. Lindqvist decided to test baby 47's apparent abilities under controlled conditions. He placed her in a room with another child, a boy named Eric who had been born deaf. The two children had never met, and Eric knew only basic sign language. Within minutes of being together, they were communicating in a complex system of gestures that neither had been taught. But it wasn't sign language. It was something entirely different. Dr. Lindqvist watched through the observation window as the two children seemed to share thoughts without any visible communication at all. Eric would start drawing a picture, and baby 47 would complete it from across the room. She would write words, and he would act them out before reading them. They moved in perfect synchronization, as if connected by invisible strings. The doctor realized he was witnessing something that challenged everything he thought he understood about human consciousness. He began documenting what he called silent communication, the ability of his subject to connect with others on a level that transcended normal sensory input. Baby 47 wasn't just adapting to her sensory deprivation. She was evolving beyond it. Word of the experiments eventually reached higher levels of government. In 1949, officials from what would later become Sweden's intelligence service arrived at the facility. They spent hours interviewing Dr. Lindqvist and observing baby 47, now 7 years old, and displaying abilities that bordered on the supernatural. She could sense people's presence through walls, predict their actions, and influence their behavior through methods that defied scientific explanation. The intelligence officers saw potential for espionage applications. A person who could read thoughts, influence minds, and operate beyond the normal limits of human perception would be invaluable in the emerging Cold War landscape. They classified the entire project and moved baby 47 to a more secure location outside Uppsala. For the next 8 years, the child known only as Astrid, they finally gave her a name when she turned 10, lived in what was essentially a prison disguised as a research facility. She was trained in languages she had never heard, taught history through books and pictures, and subjected to increasingly complex tests of her unusual abilities. The researchers discovered she could influence electronic equipment, cause small objects to move through concentration, and most disturbing of all, plant thoughts in other people's minds. But Astrid was growing up, and with adolescence came rebellion. The first sign of trouble occurred in 1955 when she was 13. During a routine psychological evaluation, the examining doctor suddenly stood up, walked to the window, and attempted to throw himself out. He was stopped by security, but when questioned later, he claimed to have no memory of the incident. He simply remembered feeling an overwhelming urge to fly away from the sadness. Astrid had begun using her abilities to fight back. Over the next 2 years, the facility experienced what officials called operational difficulties. Staff members would quit suddenly, claiming they felt watched even when alone. Equipment would malfunction during critical experiments. Documents would disappear from locked filing cabinets. Security cameras would show empty rooms when guards swore they had seen someone walking the halls. Dr. Lindqvist, now in his 60s and beginning to question the ethics of his life's work, became increasingly concerned about Astrid's mental state. She had grown into a pale, thin teenager with those same unnaturally bright blue eyes, but now they held something new: anger. Her written communications became shorter and more cryptic. Sometimes she would write the same phrase over and over: "The silence is ending." On March 15, 1957, everything changed. That morning, guards found Astrid's room empty. The door was still locked from the outside. The window was sealed shut and showed no signs of tampering. The walls, floors, and ceiling were all intact. She had simply vanished from a room that had no way out. But she left behind something that terrified everyone who saw it. Covering every surface of her room, written in what appeared to be her own blood, were thousands of words in languages that shouldn't have existed. Complex symbols and characters that linguists later claimed resembled no known writing system. Mixed among these alien scripts were phrases in perfect Swedish, English, German, and Russian, languages she had only seen in books. The most disturbing message was written on the ceiling directly above her bed. "I have learned to listen to the spaces between thoughts. Now I go to teach others." The Swedish government immediately launched a massive search operation. Intelligence services across Europe were quietly notified to watch for a young woman matching Astrid's description. Interpol was given her photograph and a carefully edited version of her background. Airports, train stations, and border crossings were monitored for months. She was never found. But the story doesn't end with her disappearance. In the decades that followed, reports began surfacing from across Europe of a pale young woman who appeared at hospitals, schools, and research facilities. She never stayed long, and she never spoke, but her presence was always followed by the same phenomena. Electronic equipment would malfunction, people would report strange dreams and shared thoughts, and children with disabilities would suddenly display remarkable new abilities. Dr. Lindqvist spent the rest of his life trying to understand what he had created. In his private journals, discovered after his death in 1978, he wrote extensively about his regret and his growing belief that Astrid had become something beyond human classification. His final entry, dated just days before his death, contained a single sentence repeated dozens of times. "The silence taught her to hear everything." The Swedish government sealed all records related to Project Stillness in 1960. The facility where Astrid was held was demolished, and the land was converted into a public park. Official documents claim that no such experiments ever took place, and anyone who asks too many questions is politely redirected to other matters. But there are still those who remember. Former staff members, now in their 80s and 90s, occasionally share fragments of their experiences. They speak in whispers about the girl who could move things with her mind, who could plant thoughts in others, who seemed to exist partially outside normal reality. They describe the feeling of being watched by invisible eyes and the way electronic devices would behave strangely in her presence. More disturbing are the recent reports from Sweden's Department of Unusual Phenomena, a division that officially doesn't exist, but has been investigating similar cases since the 1960s. Their classified files, leaked by a former employee in 2019, contain dozens of incidents involving individuals displaying abilities similar to those documented in Astrid's case. A child in Stockholm who can influence television broadcasts with her thoughts. A teenager in Gothenburg who communicates with others through dreams. An elderly man in Malmö who claims to have conversations with people who died decades ago. All of them share certain characteristics: unusual brain activity in areas associated with sensory processing, resistance to standard psychological evaluation methods, and the ability to affect electronic equipment through proximity alone. The leaked documents suggest that these individuals may all be connected to something the department calls the Silence Network, a theoretical group of people who have developed beyond normal human limitations through various forms of sensory deprivation or trauma. The files indicate that Swedish authorities believe Astrid may have been the first documented case of what they term evolutionary adaptation through environmental pressure. But perhaps the most chilling evidence comes from the testimony of Dr. Erik Svensson, a child psychologist who worked with some of these unusual cases in the 1980s. In a recorded interview obtained through Freedom of Information requests, he describes encountering a patient who claimed to have been taught by the silent teacher. According to Dr. Svensson, this patient, a young man who had been born deaf, displayed abilities remarkably similar to those documented in Astrid's case file. During their sessions, the patient would write messages claiming to have learned his skills from the one who listens to the spaces between thoughts. When shown photographs from the Project Stillness archives, the patient immediately identified Astrid's picture and wrote a single word: teacher. The implications are staggering. If these reports are accurate, Astrid didn't simply disappear in 1957. She's been active for over 60 years, moving through Europe and possibly beyond, finding others like herself or creating them through methods we can't understand. She may have built an entire network of individuals with abilities that challenge our understanding of human consciousness and physical reality. Recent developments make this possibility even more disturbing. In 2021, hospitals across Scandinavia reported a series of unusual births. Children born with genetic markers that don't match their parents, displaying accelerated cognitive development and apparent immunity to certain forms of sensory testing. These children, now toddlers, are being quietly monitored by government health services, though no official explanation has been provided for their unusual characteristics. Local media has reported on what they call miracle children, toddlers who seem to understand multiple languages without being taught, who react to things they shouldn't be able to see or hear, who influence electronic toys and devices in ways that baffle their parents. Child development experts are struggling to explain these cases within conventional scientific frameworks. Most disturbing of all, several of these children's parents have reported strange dreams featuring a pale woman who teaches their children through methods that exist only in sleep. The woman never speaks in these dreams, but she communicates complex ideas through touch, gesture, and what parents describe as direct knowing. When shown police sketches created from these dream descriptions, the drawings bear a striking resemblance to aged progression photographs of Astrid created by forensic artists. The possibility that she is still alive, still active, and now somehow influencing the development of a new generation raises questions that governments would prefer not to address publicly. What was really achieved through Project Stillness? What did sensory deprivation do to human consciousness that we still don't understand? And if Astrid has indeed been building some kind of network over the past 65 years, what is her ultimate purpose? The answer may lie in the most recent development in this ongoing mystery. 3 months ago, researchers at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm reported a data breach in their genetic research database. The stolen files contained detailed genetic information for thousands of individuals across Scandinavia, but the theft followed an unusual pattern. Only files related to individuals with specific genetic markers were taken, the same markers found in the unusual children born in recent years. More troubling security footage from the night of the breach shows something that police are struggling to explain. A figure appears briefly on camera, moving through the secured facility without triggering any alarms or locked doors. The image is distorted and unclear, but enhanced analysis reveals what appears to be a middle-aged woman with unnaturally bright eyes, who seems to move without making any sound. The figure appears for less than 3 seconds of footage, but in that brief glimpse, she turns directly toward the camera and appears to smile. Then the recording equipment malfunctions, and when it comes back online, she's gone. Computer analysis of the stolen genetic data reveals something even more disturbing. The files weren't just copied. They were analyzed and cross-referenced using computational methods that are decades ahead of current technology. Someone or something processed vast amounts of genetic information to identify specific individuals with particular traits, then targeted them for data collection with precision that suggests knowledge far beyond normal human capabilities. The implications suggest that Project Stillness didn't end with Astrid's disappearance in 1957. Instead, it may have evolved into something much larger and more sophisticated than its creators ever imagined. The girl who was raised in silence may have spent the past 65 years learning to hear not just thoughts, but the genetic code itself. And now, it appears, she's preparing for something that will require a very specific type of human being. The Swedish government maintains that Project Stillness never existed. Official records show no evidence of sensory deprivation experiments, no documentation of unusual abilities, and no missing children from the 1940s. When pressed for comment, government spokespersons redirect inquiries to standard historical archives and suggest that any such stories are products of wartime paranoia and urban legend. But the families of those unusual children born in recent years aren't satisfied with official denials. They've begun organizing, sharing stories, and documenting their children's abilities with scientific precision. What they're discovering challenges everything we thought we knew about human development, consciousness, and the boundaries of what's possible. Their children aren't just unusually intelligent. They're demonstrating abilities that seem to operate outside normal physical laws. They influence electronic devices through proximity, communicate complex ideas without language, and display knowledge they shouldn't possess. Most disturbing of all, they seem to be teaching each other, forming connections that exist beyond normal sensory channels. These parents have created what they call the Documentation Project, a grassroots effort to record and understand what's happening to their children. Their findings suggest that whatever began with Astrid in 1942 is now entering a new phase, one that involves an entire generation of children who may represent the next step in human evolution. Or perhaps something else entirely. The most recent entry in the Documentation Project files contains a recording made by Sarah Lindgren, mother of 4-year-old Emma, one of the unusual children born in 2021. The recording captures Emma drawing pictures while humming a melody that her mother doesn't recognize. But computer analysis reveals something extraordinary. The melody matches sound waves recorded in Astrid's room during the original Project Stillness experiments. Emma is humming a song that was never heard by human ears, a melody that existed only in the silent spaces of a government facility that was demolished 40 years before she was born. When asked where she learned the song, Emma writes in her careful child's handwriting, "The quiet lady taught me while I was sleeping. She says it's time to wake up now." The Documentation Project has been trying to contact Swedish authorities for months, demanding answers about their children's unusual development. They've received no response. But yesterday, Sarah Lindgren reported something that has all the parents terrified. Emma, now almost 4, walked up to her mother and said her first words, "She's coming home soon, and she's bringing friends." It was the first time Emma had ever spoken aloud, and her voice carried sounds that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. The recording equipment malfunctioned during those 7 words, capturing only static. But every electronic device in a 3-block radius shut down simultaneously. Swedish authorities are no longer returning phone calls, and parents across Scandinavia are reporting that their children have begun gathering in groups, communicating in ways that exist beyond normal human understanding. Whatever Project Stillness unleashed in 1942 is still growing, still learning, and according to a 4-year-old girl who shouldn't exist, it's almost ready to reveal itself to the world.